A joint effort against economic coercion from China. 7 leaders from some of the globe's most powerful nations met in Japan on Friday, seeking to reduce dependence on China while maintaining ties with the world's second-largest economy. Many also are urging Beijing to use its influence for good to bring the Russia-Ukraine conflict to a close. What do you think of these new developments? Let us know below and subscribe if you haven't already.
This program is brought to you by Preserve Gold, the #1 precious metals IRA provider. Call 855-962-3322.
Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A united strategy against China's economic coercion. That's the top agenda for the Group of 7 summit this year. The annual forum starts in Japan on Friday. Its participants are the world's 7 most powerful democracies: the U.S., UK, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. NTD's Sam Wong has more.
Member nations of the Group of 7 forum drafted a communique aiming to maintain relations with China while acting in their national interests.
A stable and constructive relation with China is in our mutual interest. The EU is firm on our values. We will keep voicing our concerns on human rights, whether it is in Hong Kong, in Xinjiang, or in Tibet.
Known as the world's manufacturing hub, China remains a crucial trade partner to the G7 countries. But leaders are looking for ways to counter Beijing's control over global supply chains without completely cutting ties. The 7 nations are also pushing to diversify energy supplies by working together. They're aiming to secure sources of critical minerals, which China currently dominates. The U.S. depends heavily on China for these materials. Aside from the U.S., the European Union wants to be processing 40% of the critical minerals it consumes by 2030, drastically reducing dependence on China. It now relies on China for more than 90% of minerals essential for wind power generation and batteries. With the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, nations are calling on China to use its influence to broker peace.
Given its role in the international community and the size of its economy, China has a special responsibility in the world. It has to play by international rules, and we call on China to press Russia to stop its military aggression.
Worth noting, China is also a key trading partner to Russia, and Moscow has increased reliance on its communist neighbor as Western sanctions cripple its economy. During a meeting with Japanese Prime Minister on Thursday, U.S. President Biden condemned Russia without mentioning China.
We stand up for shared values, including supporting the brave people of Ukraine as they defend their sovereign territory and holding Russia accountable for its brutal aggression.
But the 2 leaders did discuss ways to bolster defense cooperation and counter Chinese aggression. As the host of the summit, regional security will be front and center for Japan. The nation is looking to up its defense spending amid China's military buildup in the South Pacific. Beijing, on the other hand, urged Japan not to turn the summit into a political show against the communist regime. The final version of the communique will be released on Sunday. Sam Wong, NTD News, New York.
The global efforts to counter the Chinese Communist Party are expanding. U.S. lawmakers are visiting London to press for a tougher line on China. And just one day before, the UK and Japan signed a landmark defense deal targeting aggression from the Chinese regime. NTD's Jane Worrell has more for us.
A group of US lawmakers are on a 3-day visit to London to push for a harder line on China. They're led by Mike Gallagher, the Republican chair of the US Congress Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. And the visit comes at a time when they're increasing their focus on policies that counter the coercion of the Chinese Communist Party on a global scale. Now, as a major ally of the US, Britain has been critical of Beijing's human rights, but has recently shown some signs of closer engagement with the Chinese regime. A day earlier, however, the UK and Japan signed a new agreement on the Indo-Pacific region called the Hiroshima Accord. It strengthens the 2 countries' ties on security and innovation. Here's a reminder of what the British Prime Minister said about the Indo-Pacific region ahead of their meeting.
We're increasing our engagement in the region to work with allies like Australia, like Japan, to ensure that the Pacific region does remain free and open. We don't want to see any change to the status quo.
Well, the agreement aims to improve semiconductor supply chains, as well as the supply of critical minerals, which are used in mobile phones and everyday electronics, a market that China dominates. And the accord says that the country's position on Taiwan remains unchanged. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
While G7 leaders gather in Japan, the CCP is holding a summit of its own. Communist regime leader Xi Jinping kicked off the China Central Asia Summit on Thursday and unveiled a grand development plan worth $3.8 billion for the region. The two-day summit welcomes 5 Central Asian countries to the discussion table. The CCP views them as critical to its ambitions in the region. Evelyn Lee with NTD Good Morning spoke to Gregory Copley, president of the International Strategic Studies Association, about what the talks mean for us.
First, for some context, can you please just quickly give us an idea what leaders will discuss at the summit and what's Xi's underlying goal?
Xi's underlying goal is to take over where the Russians cannot regain their dominance in Central Asia. The Central Asian states, having just escaped more than a century of Russian and then Soviet domination, are not about to allow themselves to be brought back under the control of either China or Russia. But General Secretary Xi Jinping wants to ensure that the Chinese investments in Central Asia are repaid because China is running out of money. It also wants to see a build-up of the infrastructure across Central Asia, which is critical to the PRC's ability to escape the navies of the Western and maritime powers. So we could have internal lines of communication across Central Asia to Russia and to Europe. This is going to be very difficult. The Central Asian states are themselves trying to find a way to avoid trading through Russia or China and finding other ways to get to the international markets. So this is going to be very difficult. And it's an insult by Xi Jinping to President Vladimir Putin of Russia because China is trying to take over.
So I'm interested because the countries invited are all countries that were formerly controlled by Russia. Now, what does it mean? Because China is now making alliances in Russia's backyard. What would be Russia's reaction to that?
Well, Russia is fighting for regained control of the Central Asian states. It's not succeeding. The Central Asian states have turned from using Russian as their second language to using English as their second language. Most of them have turned away from using even Cyrillic in the writing of their own languages and have turned to Latinizing their script. So this is a real insult to Moscow. They still trade heavily with Moscow, but are not about to fall back under Moscow's control.
Now, what will those strengthening ties, what would it mean if they had those strengthening ties for the West and G7 countries?
Well, the West needs the trade with Central Asia, not just from an economic point of view, but also to give hope to Central Asia and also to create this great geopolitical advantage in the middle of the Russia-China-Iran alliance. This is critical, and yet we see the Western powers doing almost nothing to bolster their position in Central Asia. We've seen the president of Uzbekistan taking a lot of initiatives. He was in Germany just recently. There's a great attempt to boost Central Asian diplomacy with the West, but the Western states have done nothing. They've sent the head of USAID, the aid program leader, to Uzbekistan, but that's about all. We're not seeing a concerted recognition in the West that Central Asia is the key to the West's advantage in the new Cold War, which has already begun.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for breaking all this down for us, Gregory Copley. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Beijing and Washington edging back to the negotiating table. Relations between the two sank to a dangerous low after the spy balloon incident in February. What triggered the sudden change on the Chinese side? Two experts shed light on what's happening.
China is looking for a potential meeting between Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden set for November at the APEC CEO summit. That's according to a Wall Street Journal projection from last week. The article noted recent encounters between top Chinese and U.S. officials. These contacts appeared to be icebreakers between the two world powers. After the US downed a Chinese spy balloon in February, Chinese Defense Minister declined a request for talks with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Beijing also warned it will fight back over the Taiwanese president's trip to California in April. Why the sudden attitude adjustment? An expert said Beijing's rejecting the talks was simply to stress test the Biden administration.
President Biden didn't stop the curbs on Chinese microchips and investment, and there's version 2.0 of trade restrictions against China. Beijing's goal of stress testing falls short, so it must return to dialogue with the U.S.
Another commentator said China's shift is driven by its loss in influence in the Indo-Pacific region.
Countries like South Korea and the Philippines used to rely on China for their economies and on the U.S. for their security. Now they're starting to take sides and draw closer to Washington. In particular, they turn to confront the CCP on core issues like Taiwan.
Analysts suggest a third reason, concerning Beijing's failed attempts to alienate the U.S. and its European allies. These efforts, meant to revive China's economy, which is still reeling from the effects of the nation's zero COVID-19 policy.
A few months ago, China bypassed the U.S. to engage with its European allies. It invited French President Macron and the President of the European Commission. But these visits yielded no real change in Europe's China approach. That's why it now veers toward direct dialogue with the U.S. to work out the best way forward for economic recovery.
Experts predict no major turn in Washington's China policy, that is, unless fundamental changes occur in China's leadership.
Taiwan is still waiting for an important invitation, but the island's foreign minister says he hasn't given up hope. Taiwan hopes to attend an international forum called the World Health Assembly.
Even though we still haven't received an invitation letter for the assembly this year, we haven't given up and continue to go through various channels to clearly express our appeal to the WHO that it should invite Taiwan to participate in the assembly as an observer.
The forum functions as the globe's highest health body and is run by nearly 200 member states. It also governs the World Health Organization. Taiwan joined as an observer to the meeting in the past, but the island hasn't been invited since 2017. One major factor for the missing invite is pressure to exclude the island from Beijing. The Chinese Communist Party claims the island as part of its territory, despite never having ruled it. Because of that, it staunchly opposes formal Taiwanese participation in any kind of foreign diplomacy.
The fact that China keeps saying that it represents Taiwan in the international space is unspeakable, and we, the people of Taiwan, will not accept this. I will repeat here once again, only the democratically elected government of Taiwan can represent Taiwan's people in international organizations.
Taiwan says that its exclusion has gotten in the way of the global fight against COVID-19. On Thursday, the island's foreign ministry announced it would send a delegation to Geneva for the event anyway, noting it will try via any possible channel to convey that Taiwan should be invited as an observer. At the same time, international support is growing for Taiwan's participation. A joint statement pledged support from the U.S., UK, Australia, Canada, Germany, Japan, Czechia, and Lithuania. Taiwan revealed that several diplomatic allies and friendly countries have scheduled bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the meeting.
The support we are getting from administrations and parliaments of other countries is steadily increasing, even better than in the past.
The World Health Assembly is scheduled in Geneva, Switzerland from May 21st to the 30th. Former surgeon Enver Tohti warns against horrific crimes in China after his own first-hand encounter with forced organ harvesting. At World Falun Dafa Day in London, he spoke in support of Falun Gong practitioners who have been persecuted for their faith in China for more than 2 decades. Here's his story.
This is a quite, unfortunate thing. Falun Gong practitioners, they only practice what they are believing, and that is compassion, forbearance, truthfulness. That is the modern value, and that is basic human value. And that, to practice that, to be a good citizen or to be a good people in the society, it is a good thing to bring this social morality into high value. But since CCP is against it, they don't want you to live in the happiness. That is how they do everything to punish whoever practice Falun Gong. And all other faces who is not in favor of communism. That is sad things. And the existence of the Communist Party on Earth is a crime of our humanity. We should eliminate this communism and the Chinese Communist Party.
How do you feel being here in London today, where we can speak freely about the human rights situation in China?
Again, it's feel sorry and feel I have to do something. If we don't do anything, we just watching them fell into the hell, and that is crime in front of God. So we have a moral duty not to only save ourselves, but save millions others as possible.
Okay, well, Mbatochi, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 2 years. Here's what to look out for in our second half. How does the U.S. compare to China in naval power? And do Chinese fishing fleets pose a threat to American waters? We hear from Brent Sadler, a former Pentagon Navy staff member and a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He's also the author of a new book, U.S. Naval Power in the 21st Century, a new strategy for facing the Chinese and Russian threat. The full episode is available on our partner platform, Epoch TV. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you soon.